Are you frustrated trying to communicate with your nonprofit audience? Do you struggle to create meaningful messages? We've been talking about all things marketing and communications in the nonprofit sector this month. And so today we're going to dive into more tips, more tactics, and more advice for nonprofits who want to do more with their marketing messages. Hey everyone, I'm Ian Campbell. I'm CEO of Mission Suite. Before we jump into today's video, do me a favor, hit the subscribe button and ring the bell so that you're notified every time that we post new videos. We've been talking about nonprofits all month, and it's inspiring to think that what we're talking about here could be helping organizations as they reach out to donors, potential donors, and volunteers. If you missed any of these videos, do me a favor, go back, take a look at them. We've covered some interesting topics, and there's actually more to come too. Today, we're talking about how to create compelling messages for nonprofit organizations, and as usual, there's a lot to cover. So let's jump on it here. I hear from a lot of people in the nonprofit community who struggle with creating messages that consistently land, especially when talking to the same people year after year, sometimes even more frequently than that. It can be a challenge to keep it fresh, and I would challenge anyone listening and watching here to think a little bit more about your organization and the ask that you're making. Compelling and impactful content is there. You really just kind of have to look a little bit harder for it sometimes. It probably goes without saying, but, as usual, I'm going to say it anyway. Before anyone can get to writing the messaging themselves, you should be making sure that your board, your leadership, and communications team all have a solid base to start from. What are your organization's stated goals? What's the vision? What's your mission statement? What are your immediate needs? And what's your donation cycle? As with almost everything, the more you know, the better you can usually speak to your audience. In fact, not even usually, the better you can always speak to your audience. If you're not crystal clear on any of these things, then your message is going to suffer. So do the work, make sure that you're solid on that. So let's talk a little bit about your strategy and your communications plan. Because again, before you can really write a single word, your organization should have a current communications plan. And guess what? Well, it's homework time. Yes, your nonprofit goal is obviously to raise as much money as possible for your cause, but there's more. Some items that you should have on paper include things like, are our mission statement and core values up to date? Are we paying attention to awareness and to advocacy? How are we reaching out to various revenue streams that we might be able to find? And how are we recruiting volunteers? Knowing your organization's mission will keep everything consistent as you talk internally and as you talk to donors and potential volunteers as well. Use your mission statement to drive messages to your audience for the most impactful communications. If you think that this is small and something that you might not need, well, I'm going to argue that your branding and strategy are going to create cohesion and your audience will be able to tell. They're going to be able to see that everything is all pulled together. It's unlikely that any single message is going to carry your organization over the finish line, so you should have a plan. Work on a series of communications throughout your donation cycle to keep your donors connected. Many people would call this a funnel or a buyer's journey or a donor's journey in this case. If your goal is to solicit donations, well, start with the plan to talk to your audience and move them to the next step with some sort of a compelling message, right? This is going to help you accomplish a couple different things. First, it's going to help your organization get to know your donors and create engagement, right? The more you talk to people, the more engaged that they become. If every time a donor hears from you that you're asking for money, well, you're probably going to meet the delete button in that inbox more often than not. Because think about it, if the only time you hear from somebody is when they want something, well, you're probably going to stop answering that phone, right? So create messages that are going to inspire and tell your donors more about your cause. Second, of course, your goal here is to capture the donation, and you can, but make that message compelling too. If you've segmented your list, make your call to action impactful for that for that audience, and you're going to be successful. As you're mapping out your plan, pay attention to what segment receives what message and when. This is another great reason that you should be using a CRM, something like Mission Suite, because you can easily map out your donor's journey and keep track of all of it in one place. Now let's talk a little bit about knowing your audience. Now, just as much as you need to know the organization, you need to know your audience too. I know that may sound obvious, but I'm saying it anyway. In our last episode, we talked a little bit about segmenting as a way of getting to know your audience. And segmentation is a crucial first step in personalization and creating an impactful conversation with your donors. As people choose to give for various reasons, they're also likely to respond to messages in different ways. And you can't assume that everyone wants the same thing. Think about how you can get to know segments of your audience and how you can speak to them in ways that are going to move them to action. Also, while you're getting to know your donors, make sure you're meeting them where they are, right? A large number of your audience is likely on social media, and those messages are really going to be just as important as the ones that go out via email or a letter. Younger donors and volunteers are consuming content on social media in record numbers, so your message here could be the start of a lifelong donor relationship for your organization. We talked about nonprofit groups being so agile and adapting to change quickly, and so many nonprofits answer the call of the seismic shift in how we communicate. There are so many benefits, the least of which is potentially reaching millions. There's no reason for you to avoid social media. It is frankly an absurd, absolute must for almost any organizations. Still, many nonprofits are overwhelmed with the thought of including social media into their communication plan, and I get it, it's a lot. And if this describes your organization, well, I've got some advice for you. Test out which platforms are best for you and focus your energy there, right? You don't have to be everywhere. You don't have to be on Facebook and TikTok and Instagram and. Find a couple that work for you and focus there. You can't be all things to all people on all platforms, so it's okay to just focus your time in a couple of specific places. Keep your posts short and make them compelling. Don't forget to add a link and a call to action. Your social media doesn't have to be your primary source of communications, but you should recognize it for the powerful tool that it is. Use social media to reinforce messages by matching a mail campaign, conveying information, and of course, making that all-important ask. Now, I know it always seems like a lot of work, right? And you haven't even written a single word yet. But again, going back to the strategy of this, as a marketing professional, I can tell you that having all of these items, your email campaign, social messaging, brochures, so on and so forth, all thought out and written down is an absolute necessity and will pay off over the long run. Sending messages without a plan might seem like it can work, but I promise you that getting your branding and strategy together is going to help you and your team tell your story more authentically and more clearly. And ultimately, you're going to make more money off of it. Your most successful strategy is a series of communications over time, not one message sent over and over again. So next thing that I like to talk about when I'm talking about messaging with nonprofits is consistency. For starters, I suggest that any organization, for-profit or not-for-profit, create a style guide for their marketing, communications, and social media. Right? Consistency isn't just about frequency. The guide should include not only colors and fonts, but also a guide for language tone too. Right? That has to be consistent across all your messaging. As you find your way to excellent communications, don't forget that you also need to stay on brand. On-brand messages are going to help your audience connect with you more easily, and when your audience knows what to expect, delivering your messages become that much easier. Yes, you can still personalize your messages and still keep your messages on brand. Your on-brand messages make it easier for your audience to recognize and trust your organization. The message can change, of course, but the tone should always be consistent. Next thing to talk about in messaging for nonprofits is keep it authentic, keep it relatable, and keep it positive. Because your donors, they want to hear from the real you, right? While authenticity is important, obviously there's no handbook for how to be authentic. Genuine authenticity speaks to your ability to openly talk about your organization's mission, vision, and goals. This could include a real story about your personal involvement. Why are you there? Could include testimonials from those who have benefited from your organization, to name just a couple of different things. Thinking about your cause and mission and learning how to tell those stories is a great, compelling way to move your supporters to action. You don't have to embellish or create drama, just tell the story. As you're creating those messages, make sure that your points are clear and that your message stays on topic. Tell stories about your cause that others can understand and relate to, and then use facts and statistics to back it up. Your audience is much more likely to be moved by the narrative than just the numbers. Remember, people make a decision on emotion and then use logic to justify it. So keep that in mind here. And again, be authentic. For some nonprofits, it can be tempting to drive your point home with doom and gloom about what happens without our nonprofit, but keeping your communications positive is a much better way to connect. Instead of painting a picture about all the bad things that happen, speak to all the good that you're doing. When we can focus on good, Others are much more likely to actually be inspired to give, maybe even inspired to volunteer, give their time, whatever it is, and a lot more. And now personalization. Personalization is a great way to connect with your audience. There are tons of studies that show how donors respond much more favorably when a message is personalized. Actually, this is a big challenge for some, though, too. We'll talk a lot more about personalization actually in next week's video, so be sure to check that out next week. For now, I would encourage anyone to find a way to include some sort of personalization in your messaging. Again, if you have a good CRM, then this should be pretty easy for you and for your communications team. If not, then definitely let me know. I'm happy to tell you how Mission Suite does wonders for all these things and could really give you a lift in your messaging. Also, a call to action, right? This is something that a lot of people forget. And in talking with people in the nonprofit sector, I hear that a lot. Many nonprofits assume that their audience just knows what you want them to do, right? You want them to give, you want them to volunteer. They should just know this, right? But the reality is that it's not necessarily the case. Because it's your ultimate goal, it doesn't mean that you can really skimp on it when you're writing out your call to action. A solid call to action should be easy to find in any and every message that you send out, right? And so here's your challenge. Communicate with your audience and include a call to action that's not just, hey, write us a check. This is where you can ask for more from your audience. Think about what you need and put the call out. If you need more volunteers, well, ask for that. If you need to secure great live and silent auction items for your event, ask your audience. If you need entertainment for the event that's coming up, touch base with somebody, right? But just reach out and ask. But always you want to make sure to always have that call to action there. And, of course, back to the homework we go. Think about the names on your donor list as more than just revenue streams. They should be considered your engaged audience. The data that you have and your segmentation should point you to a section of your audience that's highly engaged and the people from whom you can ask for more. In short, think about your specific call to action and how you can use that call to action to get more for you and more for your organization. And finally, test. Might be sensing me getting to something here. You can't be afraid of testing, right? Test your messages, test your audience, test your plan. All of this stuff is just an idea until you actually execute on it. But be ready and willing to revise if you need to, right? You're going to have to find out what's going to work best. If you have to modify your messages, do it. Testing is important. It's a way to find out what's working, what's going to work again, and maybe even more. In the simplest terms, I recommend further segmenting one section of your audience with a new message and an old message. This is known quite frequently as A/B testing, right? And it's one of the easiest ways to gather data on what's working and what's not. While not every message is going to land every time, it can certainly help you understand and further create new messaging. Think about it. You just wrote a great new ask letter and you sent it out without testing. Well, whether it does great or it fails, you'll want to know why, right? Testing is going to help you find those answers. If you write great new messaging that beats the old message, well, now you have a new message to work with. But if it doesn't, well, now you know you got to go back to the drawing board, or you're still working with the same message. If you have an A/B test set up, then you can probably pinpoint a lot of the stuff that led to that not so great response to that new message. So to recap here, your nonprofit needs information and it needs data to craft compelling messaging for your audience. And those messages are going to land best when you can clearly tell your story. And of course, if you have questions or further thoughts about anything that you heard today, I hope you'll definitely reach out to me. I'm happy to tell you what I know. Shoot your note down in the comments, and maybe even source it from the crowd. Who knows? And as always, I hope you got something out of this video. If you did, do me a favor, give it a thumbs up, maybe give it a share, drop a comment on it so that others can see it too. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell so that you're notified every time that we post new videos. And while you're at it, check out the videos that are on your screen, and we will see you next time around. Cheers.